Welcome to Ninja Training number 5 here. A couple days later than normal. I was traveling on Wednesday, so I was not able to make it as usual, per my usual time, the first Wednesday of every month. But it is such an honor to be with all of you here today. I am very excited to talk about some more integration testing, and we're going to do it in a slightly different format than we've done previously, a little bit more of a tutorial here, because in my experience, in my conversations that I have, it's just writing the dumb tests is the hardest part of it all. And once we do that together, then it's like, oh, wow, that's actually not quite so difficult. So super excited about today, and we're going to be diving in here in just a couple of minutes. I'll make sure that everybody is here and ready to roll. Looks like we see Ruggero and Dan and Callie and Raphael. It's good to see all of you on today. If there's any other of you that are also hiding out on this, don't be bashful. It makes it it's really fun for me to see where everyone is all across the world. Oh, there's Joseph. I knew he'd be coming eventually. Yeah, that's awesome. I'm glad that you're here as well. So yes, make sure you say hi in this, and I will throw out. I always appreciate if you haven't subscribed yet to our Swift Audit channel, make sure you do that. And of course, a like is certainly appreciated as well. So with that, one thing I just wanted to mention is that we are about to kick off our 2022, which is kind of crazy. It's like, where did this year go? When I'm doing database dumps, I always number it based off of the date, and I was like, wow, 12/1. That's crazy. Where did this year go? Which I don't know if that's a good or bad thing, by the way. But anyways, so we're going to be starting the certification challenge here very soon with some great prizes. Feedback I've gotten from past years is that not everyone in this world is Apple fans. Like, whoa, like seriously, not everyone is an Apple fan? That's hard for me to resonate. Well, I say that facetiously because I totally get it. I understand why not everyone would be for a lot of reasons. But anyway, so we're going to just offer Bose headphones this year, which I think universally are pretty much loved across the board by Apple fans and non-Apple fans, if we can divide the world into those two camps. Sarah, good to see you here as well. So let's jump in, and I do want to say I apologize for the video quality. My Thunderbolt Intensity Shuttle, I think that's the name of it, as far as the HDMI to computer capture card, which I normally love. It has great quality, et cetera, but oh man, it kind of crapped out on me today. So we're in a you're using the old web presenter display by Blackmagic or something, whatever that is. So it's good to see everyone here. Let's jump into what we're going to talk about. So the idea here today is integration testing, and some of us are writing, hopefully want to write integration tests for new work, but there is a very strong case, pun intended, that for us to build integration tests or tests in general for existing work. And we're going to take and look at a class here, and I'm a little bit ashamed to say that I wrote it. It's been over the last few years. It's kind of grown. It was never really properly architected in the first place, and it's pretty obvious. So we're going to build some testing around this. And while this one ends up being a little bit easier of a test case, it provides the jumping off points for those difficult test cases. And so this is what we're going to do. But first, I always like to introduce a little bit of theory. And one thing to note here, and this is one reason I actually ended up working out really well. So the new expert developer test was just released. And if you're going for that eventually, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually, you will have this new test. If I remember correctly, it's ADO E710, I think. 711, I believe, is the front-end developer test. But ADO E711 or 710 is the expert developer test, and it now has integration testing on it. So this is the stuff. So this actually ends up being a bit toward certification development as it is. So this is where this stuff is really important to understand, to get in there and to work through this. So yeah, let's jump in. Yeah, I'm going to pull up our slides. Okay. So anyways, my idea is that this is going to be a start to finish tutorial. We're going to look at this. We're going to perhaps even break it at this class apart. And what would really make my day here is if you all are willing to participate. Like, provide your thoughts. Like, okay, we have this piece of code that needs improvement. So then how can we work together and troubleshoot this and figure out a really good architecture, as well as then make sure this is adequately tested. So a couple of things that are important. First, make classes testable. So if we look at our code here, this is the class we are dealing with. Now, for those of you who would like to follow along, this is in your, if you have already purchased the Art of eCommerce Debugging course, this is the code that we're working with there. In fact, this code comes from the Swift Otter project. So and I just actually updated it this morning. So, and if you haven't already gotten access to this, just let me know and we'll get you access very quickly to this. So you can feel free to follow along. As you can see, this is PHP 7.3 code in here. There's even changes in code style in here. This is literally, this was written, I think, in 2018, and it has been fixed and morphed and updated ever since then. And we no longer use this route, but this is what was utilized in the past for when you purchased a study guide on our website. So this was legitimate code. It needs to be updated. This would not pass if Navar, who's on our team, he's like we call him our code reviews czar. If he was, if I wrote this and he reviewed it, boy, it'd be red all over the place. Red marks all over the place. Yes, thank you. Dan asked if I can increase the font size, and that was one thing I missed doing here before we started. So let's see here. This is in appearance, behavior. Let's see. I always bring that up to 22, and editor, code editing, or font right here. This goes up to 22 as well. Should make life a little easier. In fact, actually, I'm just going to increase that a little further. Normally I do 22, but I'm going to do 26 today. Which I didn't really seem to increase the size at all, which is interesting. Well, that's interesting. Well, we'll just do... there we go. Wow, that was interesting. Okay, so so the first thing is making class testable. And while I was able to build a integration test for this class as it is, there's definitely some updates that we probably should make to this. For example, as I was working back through this, we have this this is like our entry point place order. And I have this try catch statement which doesn't need to be in here. So I propose we're going to move this out into a plugin. We're going to work through this and clean it up, make it much more testable / understandable. So that's point number one. Point number two, is to leverage existing data fixtures. So there is a tremendous number of pre-built scenarios, if you will, that are found already in the Magento codebase. So let's look and see where those are found. Coming into dev, tests, integration, test suite, Magento. This is the path. Well, actually, technically test suite and then Magento. Test suite's the beginning of these test fixtures here. We have all these files here, and the catalog is probably my favorite one. We have catalog files. So the underscore files is kind of a magic directory name. Dan, just wanted to double check that this is a good size font size for you now. If it's not, I can increase it even further. So we have all of these in here. So we have multiple products with different SKU and name. The most simple one would be product simple.php. And we can open this up and we will see that it creates a simple product, which has a tier price associated with it, or a couple tier prices. The product is created. There's a short description. The SKU is simple, and that's really important to be able to reference this product throughout our life cycle of actually using this product in our application. So we can also, and today I will be using actually product virtual, because in this case of testing this place order, we're not actually placing a physical order, so there's no shipping address. So we don't need to, and that's where I was running into a problem as I was building out this test case already, was using a simple product requires a shipping address, and we don't need to require a shipping address. Well, we don't want to, because we're purchasing a study guide or a virtual product of sorts. So this product virtual, and they have all of these different variations of this product with image, products. It's just insane. One thing to note is you can also use the product rollback. So basically, it's going to delete out actually, in this case, it's just a simple product. It's not deleting out the virtual product. You can create your own rollback, which I find myself often doing as opposed to just relying on the Magento rollbacks, because it uses product repository Git, which is a very expensive thing to do. And in this case, and for our tests, we're just cleaning it up step by step. So that is one other important point I do want to make here, is that database cleanup can be a challenge. And we're going to talk about something that helps with that. But you may run into problems where you have created there's a custom table and you're working through, you've added some rows into it, and then maybe you hard coded in the primary key for this custom entity, which is not necessarily a bad thing in integration tests. But then if you forget to delete out those rows to truncate that table, then you're going to start running into some errors. And while that seems flagrantly obvious at the beginning, the further you get down into this, the further you get down into the weeds of nested dependencies and all that, this can become a bit of a house of cards. So make sure that when you that you consider rolling this data back, again, if necessary. So one thing that I do here is, or sometimes I do this, and this is a strategy that you can consider, is basically when you create a new data fixture, basically, look, I mean, this is crummy code here. I mean, it's hard to read. It doesn't make much sense. It just gets the job done. You're just creating a product, just saving this product and using this product. But one thing you can consider is adding the rollback code directly to this fixture. So when you include product simple in this case, or if you're creating a custom simple product that's tuned to your specific environment, you can actually then go and delete that right then. Or you can split it out into a separate file, whichever one you want to do there. So rolling back can be a very important part of successful tests, because ultimately each test should be enclosed. And that's one thing we'll be continuing as a continuing theme here. We don't want to create tests that are dependent on others. Yes, that annotation exists in Magento integration tests, but it's not something that we necessarily want to ever depend on. My thought is every test is self-contained and hopefully deletes the information that was no longer necessary once this test is completed. And remember, for this case, we have setup and teardown methods on every in our test cases. All right, so we talked about making classes testable, leveraging existing data fixtures, and now we're going to talk about some understanding Magento annotations. The understanding. Oops. I went through this in a little wrong order. Okay. So the annotations here. The annotations are pretty cool. And I don't think it's 100% necessary to code with them. In my experience, I've just recently been starting to use them or learn about them actually. So I have not used them much except for the Magento data fixture. So I wanted to quickly talk about what each one of these are, because this is found on the test. Like if you're taking this new ADO E710 test that they just released, integration tests are covered on there. And our practice test, which we're working on getting imported in ASAP, we have a lot of questions about this. So just bear in mind this is a very important step. So number one, the Magento app area. So does your test rely on this being the front end or the admin HTML area? Pretty easy to specify, and it's pretty straightforward. So one thing that we can use also for inspiration that I love to use for inspiration is, let's open this up here. Right here. Inside this directory, up one directory, we have where the data fixtures are located. We can look at Magento's tests, the ones that they've built out, and we see how they do this, and we can learn from it. And it's brilliant. We can use it anytime we want. So I just pulled up a random test here, and we can drop in here whatever annotations that we wish to use. Or, well, we see that they're not using annotations here. It's not 100% necessary to use them in every case, but we could specify the app area if this test then relies on it. And I really haven't found that that's 100%, that's necessary almost ever. But I can absolutely see there being some situations where this is important. So, and per what I was saying earlier, we have our setup and we have our teardown, both of these that are available to be used here. The Magento cache. This was an interesting one that I just learned about in my preparation for this conversation. We can disable or enable caches. I think they're by default enabled, but we can enable them or disable them per test case. So, or test method. So this, again, tremendously helpful if you are testing working with a cache or fighting a problem with a cache or something along those lines. Very, very helpful. We can also change store configuration. Again, incredibly helpful. You can just specify the current store that's available here, and then then what the path is for the store configuration, and then the value for that. What I've talked about here is the Magento data fixture, and we'll be using that in our test today. And then there's the Magento DB isolation. Now, this one is a little bit confusing even to me, because per their documentation, what they talk about is what they say is the goal is to create a transaction. So it basically wraps our test method in a database transaction, which is then rolled back at the end of this test method. And any transactions that are used inside of this, so for example, saving an order, then a transaction is created for that, it would cancel that transaction. So basically, we're using one transaction that's wrapping the entire test method. Now, the reason I say it's confusing is, when is this on and when is this not on? It seems like from the documentation, it is on automatically when we use a Magento data fixture. If we do not use a Magento data fixture, this is not automatically enabled. So just keep that in mind, but it can be really helpful if you are creating your own custom fixtures and utilizing them in this scenario. Now, one thing to also note with fixtures, you don't have to use the Magento data fixture annotation. That would kick it into the Magento DB isolation, but it's not necessary. Like, you can just include the file yourself, and that most of the time I have done that in the past. I don't know if that's best practice or not, but I will be using more of the Magento data fixture here going forward. Dan asked, what happens if the MySQL server goes away or PHP goes away during a test? Will that transaction be committed? To the best of my knowledge, no, it will not be committed. With the transaction, it requires, and I'm not very strong on exactly the inner workings of transactions, but my basic knowledge of it is basically we start the transaction, these rows are inserted, rows are modified. So you can do an insert, then you can do a select right after that, get those rows, those values that were inserted. But to the best of my knowledge, it's not going to be actually committed until we call the final commit. Yep, that makes sense. So yeah, it's not going to actually, those values will not be committed, and you will get the error. Joseph, yeah, that's great, Joseph. Thank you. All right. So that was, I want to make sure that this is, yes. Oh, one other thing that I wanted to also call out is we only want to care about the input, the output, and the absence of errors. The idea is black box testing. So yes, that means we could, I guess, theoretically test a very large method, and that just makes it more difficult to test the large method. We have more inputs and we have to make sure those are set up correctly, etc. But we don't want to necessarily care about the inner dynamics of this. We want an object that we can test out of this as well as possible, and we can also vary the inputs to see then how it affects the output. But we don't actually care what happens in this method. So, for example, back in my purchase class here that is in need of some serious help, what we're doing here is we are passing in an input. Now you see that there is no input to pass into this specific method. Well, that was because in the day I was really enthralled with dependency injection, and I'm using a factory, and I'm passing in the only one that is not how do I say this? The only one that cannot be automatically determined is this incoming order details interface, and that is the one that is passed in, and we use that. So we have this this order, etc. So that's used throughout this whole method. So it's one extra step, but it's not a big deal to test this. So past that, all we're looking to see, our test case that we're going to build is we're going to see what comes out of this in this form of this purchase details interface or the concrete implementation of it. That's all we're going to look at. We don't care what else happens inside of here. We don't. At the end of the day, all that matters is the fact that we get a successful result out of this. And I found that it's been very liberating. And I think that's one of the challenges with unit testing, because ultimately with unit testing, you care about actually what happens, what methods are called inside of this method. And there's no stopping you from doing that with integration tests. I just find that approaching this with a black box idea in mind can be very helpful. Now, the question then you'd say is, but Joseph, don't we want to make sure that there's a lot of functionality in this one class that we need to ensure it works? Don't we want to, how would we test some of that? Well, that's the problem with, that's why we need to create testable classes. When we create testable classes, then we can ensure at a more granular level that stuff is happening as expected. Now, here's the point. We can, if we blow this class up into multiple classes, then we will have the opportunity to do much more granular testing, but still in this black box framework. We don't have to necessarily worry about getting down to the nitty-gritty details like for a unit test, but we're still testing units of functionality that would have normally been in place order. So the other thing that I have found myself doing, whether it's right or wrong, it's just something that I have found, is I write smaller classes and I test those, but then I will still often create a fairly basic general test to test the whole process, just to make sure that works. So yes, each of the individual components works, but for example, if I was to miss testing a class or something like that, still testing the entire workflow has been helpful too. So whether or not you choose to do that, it's not a problem, but that is something that I find myself doing. So with all that preamble aside, let's jump in to building a test for this and making this class testable. So again, I find this has way too many dependencies. So the question is, how can we reduce this? Now, one thing I can't remember if I mentioned earlier, but if we wanted to start looking, okay, line by line through this, and I think we'll take just a couple minutes to do this, the first thing that comes to mind is we have, in place order, we are going to see, okay, how can we reduce the number of lines of code in this? Well, one of the easiest ways to do this is to create a plugin with a try-catch statement, an around plugin, that basically allows us to get this try-catch out of here. So we don't need to necessarily know the debugging information. All we're going to do is focus this method on a successful result, and then the plugin outside of that will handle this type of crummy error handling, if you will, which honestly was pretty crummy. And then it obviously changes the values for this return types. So we'll do that here in just a second, but let's quickly review what else happens in here. So when we come into here, we enter our try-catch statement, incoming order transport, don't necessarily know what that does. Then we we see our configure quote. Now, this is basically configuring a Magento quote object that will be, we see it returns a cart interface, which should be aliased out. But it basically builds a quote that is then the order is submitted from. Exactly the same workflow as is normally in Magento, except the cart creation happens immediately before placing the order. So it basically just works through a whole bunch of setting details. We have our get customer. It loads the customer up. Our payment information. This is designed. We use Braintree on the site to make sure it passes in the correct values for this. Which one thing to note is we obviously do not want to use Braintree for our testing because there's no reason to. So we will introduce check money order here, so which will be a slight change to our purchase class. We have, it looks like get email is no longer used. Get product, so we're loading that from the product repository, which is expensive, but it is what I was doing at the time there. We have our first name, getting our first name, last name, etc. So, I think so there's a couple of options. The biggest two changes I see we should make is configuring quote should not be part of this class. The name of this class is purchase. It's a entry point for the web API. So I suggest we pull all of quote configuration out of here. And second, I suggest we wrap this purchase method in a plugin to eliminate our exception details here. So those are the two updates I'm going to make here. And then we will jump into writing our tests. So and feel free to jump in if there's any questions or even suggestions or comments that you all have. I very much appreciate and value the conversations. We've had great conversation thus far. So let's jump in and do this. So I would use the Magento's automatic plugin generation, but the problem is I would have to close out PHP Storm, because there's been a bug that's been introduced there. And that is, once you create this plugin, the modal background that grays everything out doesn't leave. So I have to literally restart PHP Storm. So we're not going to do that here. We're not going to do that. So basically, I'm going to just drop it here. We have download product plugin, and I'm going to call this okay, we'll call this place order exception handling, if I could spell that one correctly. And all this code will be available again if you are part of the e-commerce debugging course. So I'll commit it up and so that it's easily available. All right, plugin function around place order. Drop this in here. Subject. There is nothing else, so all we have to do is callable, proceed, and we do want to specify the return type of this is purchase details interface. Now let's alias some of this out. Okay. And then, all right, that's a little long, but normally that works fine because my font size isn't so big normally. So, okay, all right, so then let's copy this out. And again, it's really, the more we can just break this stuff up and out, really makes life a lot more simple. So you'll see how clean this other place order method gets. And don't be afraid to come back and to update this stuff, especially if you have it tested. If you don't have it tested, it makes things a little more tricky, but because you don't really know whether or not there is actually going to be a legit problem. So return, let's see here. Output is proceed. Then we're going to return the output. All right. Now, we might not get an output here, so and that's why we get an error here. So we'll fix this here in just a second. We'll just do this, and the output is the details factory. We'll drop this into our constructor. For the sake of time, I'm just probably going to do make this update, but certainly would recommend modifying the popping out the quote creation information as well. All right, we have our details factory. And we are going to, actually the easiest probably as I'm looking at this, we'll just return this out like this. So return proceed, and then we will return our output here. So the next step is we have, all right, we need to get some access to some stuff. So one thing I do see is our logger is we need a logger. So we will simplify that out. Okay. All right. Hey, Joseph, I think I missed you here, but it was a pleasure having you, and same to you as well. All right, so let's see here. All right, so we got this, our around place order, and we are, again, just to reiterate, what we're doing is we're taking the try catch statement that was in our original method, and we are moving this out. Now, one thing to mention here is another approach. I'm doing the breaking out first, but another approach and another way to do this is write your test first and then break it out to make sure that this method still works. And as I think about it, that probably would have been a slightly better way to do it. So we're not going to do too much testing. We're just going to go ahead and write our test, and then we'll come back and ensure that this all works. So let's just at least get a first take on this. So we have our subject. Let's now, in order to get the order, we know are not going to call this order. We can call subject get order. We'll see if that works. No, that does not work. So let's just create a method to expose that here. Get order details, and I don't remember the return type on that. Return this order. Incoming order details interface. Okay. So, yeah, order details, plural. Come back here. All right, so then now that that's exposed, we have easy access to it here. We'll drop these values in, and yeah, is there better ways to do logging? 100%. It's definitely for sure. So let's see here. We need to, so success is false. We can literally merge some of this together here. We don't need to change these values. And you'll see this ends up actually, I think, well, it's probably a net wash, roughly a wash of code, but it does clean it up. It makes everything a little more focused in our original method. All right, so message. Clean that up there. All right, so I think we are in a pretty good place at this point. The last thing we need to do is we need to update our dependency injection. So what I like to do here is I'm in my plugin right now. I copy the target class. I drop down to here. Type name is, oops. Type is, you'll see it pretty quick. I pull up here, copy this class name, drop that in as the type, and I pop the name as the name of the class name, and pretty easy right there again. So we just made a significant change. And again, as I'm thinking back about this, it would have been a little more logical to write our test first and then make this change to verify that everything is still working, but we'll have the same net result either way. So we have this. Oh, let's make sure we clean up our class here. So we get to recognize the value of the changes we just made. You'll see the title. This is no longer changing on the fly. Our message, we can clean that up. The purchase type, the video, the test ID. All right. Now, for code quality, that I think was a success. We don't need this anymore either. There's probably another way we can clean, another thing or two we can do here, but this is this is so much better. Like I would move those together, save. Yes, there's probably some work to clean up we can do. This is still a number of methods too many that's being run, but at the end of the day, this is not bad at all. So congratulations, we just made some good progress there. So let's drop down and let's create ourselves a new test. So in our download product directory, come into test integration, we're going to create a new test case for, this will be in model/purchase test. So basically take the path of this class you're going to test and add the word test to the end of this, .php. Say Swift Otter extends test case. Bingo, done. All right. Now, the first thing we can do is public function around, or no, test place order. So basically now we take the name of the method we're testing, and this is not a hard, fast rule. Take the name of the method we're testing and we just add the word test in front of it. Again, quite simple. So if we want to start out with something really simple just to see, hey, is this working? Assert equals, what's going on here? Okay, assert true. True. We'll pass this in. And in PHP Storm, what you want to do is on the Mac, Control-Shift-D will execute the currently selected whatever. So if you're inside a test method, it will execute that. If you are inside of this class, it will execute all the test methods inside this test case. So, all right, we see that this worked. So congratulations, that was successful, which was very nice. So the next thing we need to do is, it's not necessary. We don't have to do it this way. You can do it in each test method. But again, to reduce duplication and to eliminate what's not 100% necessary, I do like to use the setup method. And there's, as we can see here, there's nothing that happens in the parent setup method. So we can safely, oops, where'd that go? We can safely take this auto-generated step out of there. And what we're going to do is call, that's right. I like to use since we're testing one specific class, I like to call it target. That's just me. I don't think that's necessarily industry convention at all. I call it target because then it's easy. I can switch from one to another, and I'm always using the same name, and it makes copying a little bit easier that if one so chooses to do that. So either way, I don't think it's 100% necessary, but it's something that you can do. So we'll set the type as our purchase model. And now in setup, this target is equal to bootstrap. So this is bootstrap inside Magento Test Framework. Nope, actually that was wrong. Test Framework Helper. That's right. Test Framework Helper. So not inside, just directly there. All right, get object manager, create. All right, so let's create our purchase class. Now, the other thing I like to do is I do like to alias the class name as well to target class, whatever you can call it. Again, it's a little more reusable, and in the cases where you have some similar code you're testing, you can just copy from one to the next. I can see reasons why to do that, and I see reasons why not to do it. It is a personal choice. So at this point, let's run this again and see what happens. Again, you want to be running this fairly regularly because you hate to write a whole bunch of code and and run into a problem where, yeah, it's not working as expected. So that seemed to work great. Good. All right. So one thing to call out is the order in which setup is called. I can create let's create one more method here. Public function test another place order. We're going to put the very same code in there, and we're going to set a breakpoint. So remember, actually, we'll come up here. We'll click outside of. We're not in any test methods here. Control-Shift-D, and we will run every test case, every method in this test case. All right. So notice the setup method is called. We're going to run it again. Test place order is called. Setup is called again. And then test another place order. So you'll notice two things. First, it's going through this sequentially. So test from the top to the bottom. Now, you can change that with the depends annotation that Magento provides. You can do that there. I don't know why you would do that, but I'm sure there might be a case. The second thing to note here is we can, the setup is called every time. So what this means is we get a new version of this class every time a method is run. And that's pretty helpful, actually. So whenever we call on setup, it's a new version of this every time. So if we're making changes to this target class, i.e. the purchase model here, if we're making changes to that, it's been reset to before the next test method is run. So that was a bit of a light bulb moment for me when I think I read about that. It was pretty good. So all right. So with this in mind, let's run this again. Looks like everything will pass just fine. Now let's start bringing in actually trying to run this code. This is where stuff gets real. So let's do this. So let's say result equals this target place order. And we will try to run this. We don't need a breakpoint there. All right, let's see what happens. We can even step in. All right, we got our first exception. So why do we have an exception here? Or actually more like, what is there? All right, the product that was requested does not exist. Verify the product and try again. Okay, so why would the product not exist? Well, remember, we're thinking of this in a black box format. We have inputs, and we send the inputs, and we verify the outputs. Provided, well, that's pretty much always going to be, we send a constant input, we should get a constant or consistent output. Well, we didn't send any inputs. So we need to go build out the inputs. And this is where I think the mistake that I made when the original architecture of this becomes a little more flagrant. My overzealousness of using dependency injection really comes to bite me in the butt pretty bad. So we have this, so our purchase model, I'm sending this incoming order details interface. Now, we have nothing to indicate that this is a required piece of information, right? Because even there's a preference to map this over to incoming order details concrete implementation. So at the end of the day, it would be a very good change. We're not going to make it here, but I would highly recommend moving this parameter and dropping it down to place order. There's literally no reason at all to have it up in the constructor other than, again, somebody who is just trying to get calibrated on when to use dependency injection, when to not use dependency injection. So that is specific to every time place order is called. Thus, it should be a parameter for that. All these other classes here are just support details. So with that in mind, we now need to go back and modify our setup class here. For the sake of time, I'm not going to do it, but I would highly recommend. It'd be a great exercise, you going through and modifying that and then updating the test. This test will be committed, so you can go back through and modify it, run the test case again, and see exactly how this works. So we now have to we have our create method here. You notice that there's two parameters. There is the type and there's the arguments. So arguments need to be what? Now, and actually, this will make it even more testable by moving this value up to be a argument for this method. Why is that? Well, because right now, if we're creating this target in a consistent unified place in our setup method, we don't have control over it in the individual test methods that we're creating. So we technically would then want to just, if we have to change it per test method, we would then take this code and then drop it into each test method, which makes it less usable. It's more verbose. So again, that's a way we can boost testability even in that way. So we're not going to do that here for this moment, because I'm hopeful that all of you know exactly what is involved in doing this. So we need to create an order. So we're going to specify our order key, and we're going to have to build an order. Let's drop down here. We'll create a private method, which is going to return the type of, again, this is not 100% necessary, but it's really good for static analysis. Cool. All right. So how do we create the order? Well, we have turn this, get configured, or create configured mock. We have our original class name, which I'm pulling this up on my other screen here. So 1 second. And then we have our configurations. And this is actually really cool for building out mocked objects. So we have actually, let me pull this over so you can see the methods in here. We have these different methods: get email, get name, that potentially could be called in our purchase class. And what we end up doing is we'll say get name equals Joseph, get email equals test at test.com, etc. So this is pretty easy, and I'm going to actually copy over this information just so that I don't waste your time as you watch me build this out. So we have then 3 classes in addition that are expected to be returned, and I'm going to also copy these in as well. And we need to get the classes for this configured. We have our incoming address interface, incoming share request, and incoming order. I think I'll just copy all this in. Drop those out, and I think this should. But we also have our checkmo payment method, which like I said, we're going to be updating it so we can also work with that. Let's try running this test case again and seeing where we're at. Any questions about? Yes, Dan. Just yes. Again, a great question here. So the more granular the methods and detailed, the better for testing. Yes, I think to an extent, right? We could put every line on its own with its own method, and it's a balancing act. Like you see, I was completely wrong on how I architected this system earlier, and now I'm coming back through, and I'm like, wow. I have some significant architectural changes that we should make. So and I think one big part of this is being open to say, hey, look, I wrote some lousy code, and I'm going to go back through and I'm going to fix this lousy code. Being willing to do that. And I think tests are the mechanism to give you security in making said change. That's my opinion. Well, it's my opinion. I've experienced this so often. It's very good. So let's step in here. Now, one thing you'll immediately notice here is we didn't step through our plugin. Is that a problem? Yes, no, maybe. I don't know. So one thing to note is when you have created a plugin, whatever, plugins, you need to go clear out the cache for this test environment. So I'm going to drop down to, I'm going to collapse this test suite up, temp, sandbox, and so we come into, actually, let me just show the path here, dev, test, integration, temp, sandbox, var, and you should be seeing this is looking pretty familiar here. We'll just delete this cache folder, and we will rerun the test. It'll take just a second or two longer, but we can easily run this. Again, yeah, so one other thing I think I forgot to copy over. Well, we'll experience that problem in just a minute. So it's rebuilding the cache, and as a result, we should, provided I configured everything correctly, we should then run through our round plugin, which is going to validate basically everything as it was. Again, it would have been better to write this test first and then make the change, but it's at the end of the day, it's not that big of a problem. All right, that's just taking just a little bit longer. I have my M1 Mac on order, and I am really excited about it, and I am hopeful that it shows up as soon as possible. It's like going to be like a week for shipping. So I was excited when I saw that, and experiencing a slow test initialization like this is a bit of a pain. You can see there we go. It's rebuilding this out. And now we're running it. Cool. Awesome. So we now have our order information going in here. Everything should be set. So let's just for the sake, there we go. Looks like it's trying to call our plugin. And of course, I didn't set a breakpoint in there, but it does appear to have called it. It's still running. Test passed. So it worked. So that actually just worked right there. Now, I will say that I was expecting to get a problem, and that problem is that this SKU does not exist. So that's where that is where our data fixture comes in, and I will drop this on here real quick to show you exactly how this works. Now, one other thing is to note, we didn't have any I didn't review the results, and we don't have any assertions here either. So I'll drop this data fixture in. Remember, this maps out to, and I'll show you. This maps out to dev tests, integration, test suite, Magento, drop down to catalog files, and we have this massive litany of really helpful fixtures that have already been built out for us. So we can use it, or we can copy it, modify it, and reuse it and change it for whatever purpose we want it to be used. And I've used these so many times. I love them. So with that said, let's create an assertion so we can verify that this works as expected. All right. So what do we want to assert? Well, what is the output type for placing an order? It's purchase details interface. We have success, message, raw total, order number, title, etc. So I think we need to make sure that this is a success. So this assert true, result get success. And remember, this is public facing. So there is a way to well, let me put it this way. Do I want to go there? Yes, I think I will. So if you need more information about this order, for example, like the order itself, we are returning purchase details interface. If we go, and let's see where this is called from. All right. Oh, shoot. It's not actually called there, and it could have been removed out of this for compatibility. Let's look at, yeah, it was. Okay. So ultimately, there's no way to more or less test this on the front end. You can easily create up a web API XML file and pass this in. But if we, as we would be worried about what information is passed out of here, so keeping API in mind, we can return the product purchase details interface. But what I find myself often doing is creating an external of, how do I say this? Creating, I'll just make sure I have this right. Wow, I'm getting myself backwards here. When I go off script, I have a bit of a problem here sometimes. So creating a so we have purchase details interface, creating one that is publicly exposed and one that is privately available. So the publicly exposed one is going to have fewer methods than the privately available one. So, man, I'm getting myself backwards here. So we have our price interface, which we will make this. Is the question is this is internal or external? This will be external. This cannot, the one that is exposed to the API cannot extend the internal one. So what I will do here is I will create a new internal. Oops, we'll just do it like this real quick. PHP class internal price response interface. Namespace Swift daughter. There we go. Interface is internal, and this extends price response interface. We're going to have a public function get order. This will return order interface. All right. Oops, and we have to do that silly magic. All right. So then we can set our method to return an internal price response interface. But the key point is our web API XML declaration has to point to price response interface. So the cool thing is we get the value of, well, so Magento then filters out the values that are not applicable for this internal price response interface. So we're able to expose something internally or let something be available internally, but then expose a subset of those methods externally. So just to reiterate, the price response interface is then shown, is specified in webapi.xml, and it's this subset of methods, these getters and setters. But internally, we've created our internal price response interface, and that is what is returned out of this place order. So I'm going to quickly update our plugin just so that we don't cause a problem here. Simplify that. All right. So we are very close to finish here. I show we have 2 minutes. I think we can get it pretty much done in 2 minutes. So we have we're returning this internal price interface. And one thing we do need to do is we have nothing that implements this. So we're going to come over to price response. We're going to change this over to internal price response interface. And we're going to then return the order. Turn this order. All right, so we will do actually, well, actually I'm not going to worry about this. I'm just going to return a null for right now, just so we can wrap this up in a good amount of time. But this is how you would do that, and it can make life a lot easier for you when you can split this out. All right, we'll make sure we turn this or null. All right, so finally we have to build our assertions. So this is assert true, result to get success. So let's run this quickly. Oh, nice. We are getting an error. I shouldn't have gone off script like that. So we're just going to, oops. We're going to revert this back. Just details information interface. And then we will assert true. Well, we'll assert that we have success, and there's whatever assertions we want to. Oops, we got a type error here. Return value must be an instance of. Oh, I forgot to revert this back out to on our plugin. Okie doke. One last run here, and we should be golden. There we go. So we have our result. Credit payment method is not available. So either way, that means this shows that our plugin is working. What we need to do, there's a couple of tweaks we need to make here to our quote creation. Basically, it depends a little bit too much on, there's only 2 types here. So we see we can run PayPal or Braintree. So we would want to add in check money order in there and tweak that just a little bit. It's like 2 or 3 lines worth of a change. But at the end of the day, we're able to verify that our wrapper works, our test works, and everything is basically set and ready to go. So this was, again, a little bit different format, and I covet your feedback on this. Did this get a little too long, or was this perfect? Like, how helpful is this? Because again, what I have found personally be very helpful is just to walk through this to see exactly how to create a test, how to build this out, especially in the form of for existing code and understanding how to leverage fixtures, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what I wanted to present to you all today. Thank you for joining. Thank you for taking the time. Super excited about this and looking forward to next month and also kicking off the certification challenge. So is there any final questions before we sign off here for today? Any questions? If not, we will wrap it up. I wish you a Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. I know not everyone, United States more or less celebrates Christmas, but everyone all over the world, different holidays. But yes. Yep, very good. So wish you just a wonderful holiday season, and hope you... Oh, one question. The certification that was 703 is now... Let me pull this up here. It's learning.adobe.com/certification.html. I think it's on the second page. Certified expert Adobe Commerce developer. They had the 2 test numbers in there. Oh, I was wrong. It was actually 709, not 703 to 709. Let's see here. Open up Slack as opposed to pulling over to Chrome. Wow. I am dropping this here. There's that. So the old test is available still for, I think, a month or 2. It's not immediately removed. So as such, you can still take it at your leisure. Cool. All right. And remember, swiftauto.com/Slack for any of you that have not already joined. We are literally over 2,000 members now. We just broke that record a couple weeks ago, or a week or so ago. And again, a super awesome place. People like Dan, Joseph, not me. Like, I'm there, of course, with Joseph Leedy. And I think I recognize a few others of you. Maybe Cali Experiments, I think, is also in there. Ruggiero is on there. Raphael, like some super, super smart people is in there. And I do my best to pop in as much as I possibly can. This has been just a ridiculous week. So, yeah, jump in there, ask your questions. I'm happy to help out. And there's also really smart people there that help out too. So, oh yeah, that's right. The other Dan. That's right. The other Dan is also there too. So awesome. I appreciate it. And thank you. And I am looking forward already to next month's conversation. Take care.